please give a very warm welcome to one of the artists.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be back performing at Emerson. It's always a real treat to be here and to see some faces I know and to meet some new people. And yeah, I'm really excited to do this piece. As I've already said, it's the first sort of full-length piece I've done for many years, and since before the world collapsed and went doolally. So here we are. Yeah, it was really interesting to work on this, and the initial title, the working title, was Pan Rising, and I was really excited about it, but then I was told that it might get a lot of disappointed bread enthusiasts. So I changed it to Wild God Rising, so here we are. So, thank you. Myths and stories. They have a life of their own. They exist in the landscapes that we walk through every day. And they exist inside of us, pulling at the strings of our subconscious. But when a god or a goddess is needed, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, they will rise from their feasting table or wake from their slumber, and they will begin to call. Now at first their call will be soft and low, and only those who are really tuned in will be able to hear. But a god or a goddess will not be ignored, and their call will grow louder and louder until it ricochets off the top of the mountains and until it shakes the very core of our being. And now a wild god stirs. A wild god is howling in the night. A wild god is calling. Tell me of Pan. always existed. Yet, like all things, he too was born. He was born under a giant greenwood tree in the leafy forests of Arcadia. Born to the trickster god, the messenger, Hermes, and the beautiful daughter of a shepherd of Arcadia, a mortal woman. Now Pan, when he was born, he was not like other babies. Already he grew a thick, rugged beard. Matted hair, grew 2 tiny horns. He had the dappled, furry chest of a fawn. And where those cute little dimpled baby legs should be, he had the hairy hind legs of a goat. Now his mother, as soon as she saw this abomination of a child, she couldn't bear it. She bolted and she ran. But the gods, they do not see things as we mortals do. And when Hermes looked at his child, he was immediately filled with joy, with love, with pride. Here was a child that would not be fitted into any boxes. A child that straddled the border between the civilized and the wild. A real force for change. So Hermes scooped up his son and took him out of those leafy forests to Mount Olympus to meet the other gods. And oh, how the other gods delighted in him too. Zeus bounced that goat boy up and down on his knee. Dionysus placed him on his shoulders, and round they ran. Demeter and Persephone took turns squeezing his rosy cheeks. Oh, the gods loved Pan, and thus he grew up the earthly equal of the gods. And as he grew, he took for his domain lordship over all of the woodlands and the solitary places. He was king to the hunters and the fishermen, lord of the flocks and all of the wild things of the forest. Even the wild bees took him as their overlord. So joy and force and youth and spring was Pan to all of those in his kingdom. Oh, Pan meant the richness of the sap in the trees, the lushness of the grass, the green stems of the purple hyacinths and the golden daffodils. Pan was the trilling of the birds that seek their mate and find them. It was the cooing of doves on the nest of their young, the arrogant virility of bulls and stags whose belling and lowing wakes the silence of the hills. And Pan, too, was the lightness of heart that makes the nymphs dance and sing and the fawns leap high for the very joy of being alive. This is what Pan meant to all of those in his kingdom. When I was a child, the spirit of Pan was with me. I wore my goat's horns proudly and jumped from hoof to hoof on my hairy legs. I grew up on a farm, home farm in rural North Buckinghamshire. And I remember a lot of the time was spent outside, and remember those endless summers of childhood. Me and my brother and my sister and friends, we would spend our time carving secret passageways through the long grass in the paddock before it was cut for hay. We would dig mud from the old pond in the field and make pots of all different shapes and sizes. We'd climb the trees, we'd make bows and arrows out of sticks and string. Many of my friends also lived on farms nearby, and we would climb to the top of impossibly high stacks of giant round hay bales, and then we would pothole down the gaps in between right to the bottom. One summer at my friend Henry's farm, we found an old bag of gunpowder at the back of an old barn, and oh, what a summer that was. That is a different story. The outdoors was a place to explore the magic and the beauty of the world. And when I was at school, I also tried to spend as much time outside as possible. At break times, when many of the other boys were playing impromptu football matches or swapping FIFA 95 football stickers, I could be found at the corner of the playground in a small scrub of land with some trees, with a group of other boys in a club we'd unofficially named the Round the Tree Diggers. Now, as the name suggests, we'd spend each break time on our hands and knees in the dirt, digging holes around the base of the trees, using sticks and stones, anything we could get our hands on. And when break time was coming to an end, we would all stand and we'd walk around the trees and inspect the handiwork of our peers, judging on depth, stability, construction methods. Now, when it rained, sometimes we'd have to go inside, but it didn't matter too much, because there we would play with our meticulously painted Warhammer figurines, wood elves and goblins. I myself was the commander of a pretty impressive undead army of skeletons. When I look back on that boy, there was a certain sense of melancholy, because that is a boy who has yet to be touched by ideas of needing to fit in or be cool. This was a boy on the verge of change. It was a boy that was about to sense a strange new creature on the horizon, girls. And it was a boy who was about to feel that swell of hormones and that rising self-doubt. There's a little boy who was about to realise that goat's horns and untamed youth were no longer acceptable.
I need some water for this bit.
Here I am, back. Well, many of you think that you are meeting me for the first time, but oh no, I have always been here. Oh, I've been here for a long time. I was here when all of this was just a cloud of dust and gas. I saw the land masses form, magma flow. I watched as meteors rain from the skies. I watched the oceans rise. I saw the first bacteria form in the sea. I saw the plants arrive and start to breathe. I saw life crawl to the land. I saw the trees grow. Oh, I saw it all, and I was it all. Back then, there was no need to define and divide. But those days of lounging by crystal clear rivers, playing music, dancing, chasing even the nymphs, oh, they were to come to an end. Now, you lived amongst me at first, like all the other flora and fauna, taking only what you needed for the most part. You worshipped me in many different forms. You and I were deeply connected. We understood each other. You respected me as I respected you. You understood my kindness as you understood my wrath. But I watched you grow. I watched others like you come from the seas, bringing with them new technologies. Why hunt and gather from the land? It's a hard life indeed, when you should cut down some trees and plant your seeds. Well, no harm in that, I thought. Let them make a few clearings, plant their little fields. But you were restless, not like the trees and the squirrels. Not like the mammoth and the lion even. Little creatures with big ambitions, slowly creating the noise that would drown me out. I watched as you began to get it into your heads that human beings were above the animals and the plants. I watched as you got further and further away from yourselves. I watched as you got it into your head that you must pursue civilization at all costs. And I watched as slowly you made an enemy of nature that needed to be conquered. And you made an enemy of yourselves. Oh, I had made a mistake. Let them cut down one tree, and they shall cut down them all. If there's ever a character in Greek mythology who knew the dangers of pursuing the wrong path, then it could be said perhaps to be King Midas. Now many of us will be familiar with the story of Midas and his golden touch, given to him as a boon by Dionysus. At first a gift, but very soon he realised that perhaps this was a curse, as anything that he tried to eat or drink turned to gold. And finally, when he accidentally turned his daughter into a golden lifeless statue. Now, after screaming and wailing, Dionysus had eventually told him how to rid himself of the touch of gold. We're not going to focus on that story. For if you flick through the pages of Ovid, you will come to another story. A story of a very different Midas. This is a Midas who knows the dangers of pursuing wealth, knows the dangers of pursuing civilization at the cost of everything else. And this is a Midas that has decided to look somewhere else for the answers. This Midas is looking for the answers to the bigger questions in life, in the woodlands. He's looking to the teachers from the trees and from the birds, from the mountains and from the lakes. And this is where we will find Midas walking through the wood. Now Midas was walking along, and suddenly he heard raised voices. So he hid down behind a bush. He peered through. And imagine his surprise as there to one side he saw Apollo. Apollo, shining forth, Apollo with his golden hair, Apollo with a white tunic, Apollo with some lovely sandals, and in his hand he held a lyre. It was a lyre that had been crafted by the finest craftsman that a god could find. Now when Midas looked to the other side, he saw a very different sight. He saw horns curling up to the skies. He saw the hairy goat's legs. He was witnessing the god Pan. Pan, with his pungent animal smell exuding from him, and Pan held in his hands a set of pipes. Now, these were not pipes made by the finest craftsman a god could find. No, these were pipes crudely cut from reeds at the riverbank and tied together with vine. Now, what Midas was about to see was a musical battle. You see, Apollo, he had heard that Pan was saying down in the forest that it was his music that was the best. Now, this is not what a god of music wants to hear. So he had left his palace on Mount Olympus and he had come down into the forest to seek out this beast. So as Midas looked on, he saw the start of this battle. And it was Pan who was pushed forward to go first. All of the lesser gods, lesser gods, they all gathered around to watch this battle. Now, Pan stood firm on the ground, and he held in his hands his pipes. He took a deep breath, and he began to play. Now, when he played, this sound came forth that none of those gathered had ever heard before. This was a sound that went straight down into the ground through the roots of trees. It made birds fly from the treetops. It made the mountains shake. This was raw, powerful. And when Pan played his final note, there was silence. Complete silence. Now Midas looked on as Apollo stepped forward. Now Apollo, he put his foot up on a rock. He dusted it off first to make sure he didn't ruin his lovely sandals. And he made sure his hair was all neat. He straightened his tunic. And he began to meticulously tune each string until finally he was ready. And he began to play. Now, as Apollo massaged those strings, this music came forth. Oh, this music that was so beautiful. As it swirled around through all those watching, they became transported. They were taken away from those forests and they were taken to lavish halls with feasting tables laid with every precious dish you could imagine, wines and beers. They were taken away to dances, eloquent dances with kings and queens and princesses. Oh, this music was magical. Now, when Apollo played his final note, there too was a bit of a silence before a round of applause burst out with whooping and hollering. There was a brief discussion and then a mountain god stepped forth. And he addressed Apollo. He said, Apollo, we've listened to your music. And we've listened to the music of the beast. And we are unanimous amongst us. Our decision is that your music, Apollo, was the best. Now, Apollo had a speech well prepared. And he stood there and he was just about to say the first words when there was a cough. Stood from behind the bush, Midas. And I thought he should probably address Apollo in this situation, so he said, Apollo, I'm sorry to intrude, but I was here, and I agree, your music was incredible. Incredible. Oh, it was divine music fit for a god. When I listened to it, I got transported out of this forest. It reminded me of my former life as a king. It reminded me of feasting halls and elegant dances. And yet, when I heard the music of Pan, something happened. It was different. It was a music that I felt running through my body. It was a music I felt running through the roots of trees. Oh, that was the music of the mountains, the music of rivers flowing. That music was raw. And for me, I cannot say the decision is unanimous, because for me, it was Pan's music that was best. There was another silence as everyone looked to Apollo. Apollo, who stood there. I could see him fuming. What insolence! This had never happened to him before. And he lashed out, he knocked Midas down, and as Midas stood, he saw all the faces looking at him. They felt strange. They felt he looked up and he could see above him 2 donkey's ears sticking out of his head. Side with the beast and become a beast. As Midas stood there, looking at these ears that were to follow him from the rest of his life, these ears that were going to be the final nail in his separation from civilization, outcast, all of the others, all of them standing around began to laugh and mock and ridicule. All, that is, of course, except that great god Pan, who stood there quietly, silently watching. And as he saw all those gods laughing at Midas for siding with him, for siding with nature, for speaking his truth, he knew something ominous was coming, something that not even an all-powerful God of nature could stop. A change was coming, and nothing good would come from this. Now, it's been a surprisingly, well, painful but surprisingly quick transition out of that naive world of childhood into this brave new world of adolescence. Now, the first and probably most important step had been to change absolutely everything about myself. I stood in front of the mirror and I'd hacked off those goat's horns. I'd covered those hairy goat's legs between 3-stripe Adidas tracksuit bottoms. And I'd covered up that pungent animal smell below copious layers of lynx Africa. Now the next step had been to take up smoking. And I don't know if any of you know this secret, but taking up smoking is like a magical pass into the land of cool. Listening to the right music was important, and for a young man at the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, in the metropolis, what that was the market town of Bedford, that meant listening to UK garage and jungle, 2 genres of music that were about as far removed from my rural middle class upbringing. Now perhaps the most painful part of that whole transition had been the split from my old group of friends. A slow ghosting process that had burned many, many carefully constructed bridges with no chance of return. With that transition, the connection to the outdoors changed as well. The outdoors was no longer a place to discover the beauty and magic of the world. It was a place now of exile. The outdoors were now the far end of parks with 3-litre bottles of white lightning. They were dark, dank, drizzly alleyways in the cold, anywhere really away from the prying eyes of parents and teachers, anywhere where we could practice our secret initiations into the world of adulthood. Break times were no longer dedicated to digging around trees, playing Warhammer and fantasy role-play. No, the role-play now was different. The role-play was playing at being an adult at all costs. We were in a dark forest at the edge of civilization with no guide except each other. Now we had managed to push away, outcast that pastoral Pan who danced in fields, but yet another Pan was emerging, and this was a Pan who wanted to push the boundaries of what was acceptable. This was a darker Pan. This was a Pan who rebelled against musty classrooms. This was a Pan who rebelled against graphs on acetate paper and overhead projectors. This was a Pan who rebelled against complex maths equations. This was a Pan who rebelled against sitting endlessly, waiting for the clock to go round and the bell to ring. And when that bell did ring, that bell to denote either morning break or lunchtime, a challenge would be set. To escape the school, to creep out of the gates without being seen by any of the teachers, and then we would rendezvous at one of the predetermined smoking spots. The flats behind the bus stop, an alleyway about 3 or 4 streets away from the school, Castle Mound, but that one was usually reserved for after school due to its distance, or the creme de la creme, the disused hospital. Oh, that place called to us deeply, that forbidden place. We would smash glass windows and creep through eerie, dark corridors, and we'd congregate in an overgrown inner courtyard. Now, invariably, the day before, one of us would have been pressured or cajoled to go and stand and wait in the urine-smelling stairway of the multi-storey car park to wait for a drug dealer named Slim to come and bring a tiny little bag of weed, and then it would be brought out in that inner courtyard. And the rest of us would rush to pull out our long Rizla papers to try out our questionable joint rolling skills. And then we would creep back into the school, and we'd hide our red eyes at the back of the classroom, despondent to the drone going on at the front of the room. Through all this transition, something strange always sat with me. But the girls, they remained almost as elusive as they had done before. But as we went further and further into this exciting world, getting further and further away from ourselves, fueled by more and more drugs and alcohol, we felt excited, like we were doing something daring, living on the edge. And this lifestyle continued for a couple of years, until one day the sports hall had been commandeered, as it was each year. The crash mats and five-a-side goals had been replaced by the dreadful rows of desks. This was exam time. But more specifically for me, this was the final exam of my mock GCSEs. It should have been a brief breathing out period. But at the end of the exam, a teacher came to the front of the hall. He held a piece of paper. And he began to read a list of names. Jones, Guest, Shilev. Now I sat there at my desk, and before it even came, as I heard that list of names, I could feel a growing dread in the pit of my stomach. I knew what was coming. Pibworth. And we were told to stay behind. And then each of us was escorted to a separate classroom where we were interrogated by two stern teachers. Interrogated about our whereabouts after school the day before. It had been alleged by a teacher that our mischievous group had been seen sneaking out of an alleyway surrounded by a mist of marijuana smoke. Now, the most frustrating part about all this for me was that I hadn't actually been there that day. And not out of some great moral sense of right and wrong, but I'd had to go home early and catch the bus early to get... so I wasn't there, but that didn't seem to matter to those two teachers. Now, I strung together a web of truths laced with a heavy dose of untruths. I remember shaking as those teachers asked me question after question. Now, the most horrifying part of the whole experience for me was waiting outside of the headmaster's office for my mum to come and pick me up. I remember that long, long car ride home. I could feel the rage and the anger and the disappointment radiating from her. I was suspended from school that day, and it was agreed that I would be able to come back and sit my GCSE exams, and then I would not be welcomed back. But in those few short years, I had learned how to push down my feelings, how to deny my instincts, and now in the hands of the school system, I was learning what happened if you tread out of line. Oh, why are you so afraid of yourselves? Why are you so afraid of me? Because I am unpredictable. I am the dark forest, the place where you have dumped all your nightmares. I am the dark forest, the place where little girls in red cloaks get devoured by big bad wolves. Oh, Grandma, what big teeth you have! I am the dark forest, the place where you have dumped your insecurities and your fears. I am the dark forest. Oh, why are you so afraid of me? So many of you are afraid to go into the dark forest, unaware that on the other side lies a bright morning, when the pantheon of the gods reigned strong. People knew that it was important to worship my darkness as it was to worship my light. Oh, darkness was honoured. For people knew that darkness ignored only swells and grows until it unleashes destruction. And yet you have mistaken darkness for evil. My darkness is no longer worshipped, but feared. Better to cut down the dark forest and drain the swamps of the unknown than venture in, for who knows what you might find out about yourselves. Instead of trying to understand me, you tried to kill me. Now, it was a calm evening during the reign of the Emperor Tiberius. There was a merchant vessel laden with wares. It had just sailed past the Greek isle of Paxi, and as it reached the open waters, something strange happened. A voice, an unseen voice, bellowed forth a name: Thanos! Everyone on the ship looked around. Where did this voice come from? What is this name? Who is this Thanos? The voice came for a second time. Thanos! Again, everyone looked around. But when it came again for a third time, Thanos! A mariner from Egypt, whose name was not known amongst the people on the ship, came up from onto the deck. He said, "It is I that you were searching for. It is I am Thanos." And now this unseen voice called out again. It said, "Thanos, when you sail past Pylades, you must let it be known that the great god Pan is dead." As soon as this message reached the ship, men dropped to their knees, raised their hands in the air, wailing and howling spread across the ship. As all those on board began to digest this message. Could it be? They all knew what this meant. A wild god dead? The god of instinct? The god of self-pleasure? The god of prophecy? The god of all dead? Now this was no light message to receive, and certainly no light message to deliver. So there was much debate, a lot of argument on the ship. Should this message even be delivered? Now it was Thanos who stopped the arguments. He said, "I've made a decision. If the wind picks up, then we'll just raise our sail and we will sail straight past Pylades. We'll keep this message to ourselves. But if the wind dies down, if there is no wind, then we will put out our oars and we will row in towards the harbour, and I will deliver this message." Now as they reached Pylades, the sea was as smooth as glass in all directions. There was not a wisp of wind in the air. The decision had been made. So they put out their oars, they rowed close to the land, and as they got close to the harbour, Thanos stood on the deck of the ship. And in his loudest voice, he declared, "The great god Pan is dead." Now as the people on the land heard this message, they too dropped to their knees. Lamentation, wails, cries of pain, as all of them realised what this would mean. And this message, the great god Pan is dead, it travelled from ear to mouth, into mouth to ear, until it reached the ear of the Emperor Tiberius himself, the Emperor of the Roman Empire. Now Tiberius had already sensed a change in the air, so he called Thanos to his side, and it is there where the Roman Emperor Tiberius heard the message for himself that the great god Pan was dead. Now by the time I reached my late 20s, I carried this big bag of shadows over my shoulder, weighed down by fears and insecurities. Now at that point, the call of Pan was ricocheting through my whole body, and yet I was using every ounce of energy to ignore it, to silence it. Ever since I've been young, I dreamt of leaving the boredom of the countryside and visiting, living in the cities. And to some extent I had achieved this. I had lived in Brighton, I'd lived in Amsterdam, I'd lived in one of the biggest cities in the world that nobody has ever heard of, a place called Tianjin in China. And I'd spent 3 years living in the capital of China itself, Beijing. But as I'd travelled the globe, and I'd always felt this, I began to feel this sense that I was moving further and further away from myself. And the trees and the open fields of my youth had been replaced by towering buildings and close, compact streets full of people. I felt really lost. I felt like I'd done everything that I was meant to do. I had finished school at a different school. I had gone to university and got a degree. I had travelled to different countries. I had done internship after internship. I'd even done a master's degree. And yet, when I looked back over my shoulder, all I could see was a trail of destruction. I could see night after night spent sitting at bars or in friends' houses, drinking myself into oblivion. Nights half remembered that filled me with fear. Nights of complete blackout that made my soul shrink with fear. And days of shame. Days of feeling guilt. And days of feeling like an alien just dropped on some strange planet. I was a lost boy, spiralling in despair. But one day all this came to a head when I was on a trip to London for a friend's birthday party. Now the night started out pretty much the same as all nights had for many, many years. Meeting friends, going to a bar, having some drinks, some more drinks, too many drinks, drunken taxi ride to a house party. Some more drinks, I vaguely remembered kissing somebody that I knew. I had a flash of snorting something off a broken CD case, more drinks, and then nothing. When I came to, I was standing in the street. And when I looked down, I was wearing a stained t-shirt, some yellow socks and my boxer shorts. Now, half drunk and half asleep, I had woken up at that house party that I'd passed out at, and I'd inadvertently walked out of the front door. And when I came to, I looked at those row of terraced houses, and all I knew I was somewhere in East London. And every single house in that street looked the same. I didn't even know if this was the street. I didn't know how far I'd walked. I had no phone, I had no wallet, I had no trousers. I didn't know, the only phone numbers I knew I had two numbers in my head. And that one of them was the home phone number of my parents. And the other one was the home phone number of a childhood friend who I no longer knew. So that number was useless, and there was no way I was going to ring my parents. And also, what would I say from a reverse charge call in a phone box that I was lost in London somewhere, and the state I was in, it didn't feel like a thing that a rounded 28-year-old man should be saying. But now this was just before the advent of Google Maps in your pocket. So before I'd come to London, I had meticulously researched the route to the friend's house that I was supposed to be staying at the night before. And that route from the closest train station to their flat was still etched into my head, even through all the thumping and the feeling like I wanted to drop down to the ground. But there was a problem, because I was in East London and their flat was in Crouch End, which is North London, many, many miles in between, and I was in this state. Now somehow, I don't quite know how, I began to travel, and I began to walk in my yellow socks down those dirty streets and watch as they got blacker and blacker. I caught overground trains and buses. And each time the conductor came to me and asked me for my ticket, I told them a story. I told them that the night before had been my stag do, and that my cruel friends had left me in the centre of the city, and I was now trying to make my way back home. Now, I don't know if any of those people believed that story, but when they looked at the storyteller, they did not argue. Now, it took me about 3 hours to travel all the way back, and imagine the shock and surprise of my friends as I stood there ringing on the buzzer of their flat in Crouch End. And as I sat on their sofa, feeling that sort of guilt and shame that felt very familiar, I knew something different. I felt something different. Now, from that sofa, there would be a long journey, many hours spent in therapy rooms and meditation halls, going on inward journeys into myself and outward journeys to explore my part in the world. But as I sat there feeling that guilt and shame in that flat in Crouch End, I knew there was a change that I could no longer ignore coming. I knew there was a return journey needed. I knew that this path led one of only two directions, and I knew which one I wanted to take. I knew a rewilding was needed, and I knew that the call of the wild God could no longer be ignored. You tried to kill a wild God, but yet a God cannot be killed. Immortal gods cannot die. Instead, they are ignored, fragmented, ripped apart by their usurpers. You tried to kill a wild God, and you took his throne, and you made yourselves gods of all, and then you blocked up your ears so as not to hear the cries of pain and mercy from all those you took dominion over. You tried to kill a wild God, and you set up a new church, the church of civilization, and you forced all to bow at the altar of growth, casting out any heretic who stood in your way. You tried to kill a wild God, and when you realized it could not be done, you painted me red, you shoved a trident in my hand, and you pushed me down into the bowels of the earth, and then you cut down the trees to fuel the fires of my damnation. You ripped out my hair by the roots, shoved pipes into me to drain my blood, mined my organs and covered my airways with plastics and waste. Sometimes I think that you practice a reverse psychology, a psychology of projection. You rape nature and call me the rapist. You serve your own private desires and yet call me the masturbator. You leave tracks of ruin wherever you go, and yet you call me the God that favours deserted wilderness. But are your day worlds not becoming suffocating nightmares? Are your children not having more and more trouble breathing? Are you not security obsessed, seat-belted against surprise, medicated against panic attacks? And what of the nymphs? Those tiny differentiated sounds of nature, nature's sweet night music. What have you done to save them? Parks and resorts and golf courses and well-marked trails. Well, there are no nymphs there. No chance of panic. And yet also no chance of ever swooning at Earth's beauty. I watched as you divided the land, divided yourselves from the land, divided yourselves from yourselves, divided your mind from your body from your instincts, dividing, until separating yourself until the very bonds that hold everything together threaten to break. You tried to kill a wild God, but yet you do not realize that I, Pan, am only immortal because I understand that I must allow myself to die each moment over and over and over. This is no secret. I share this with you every day in the wilting of a petal and the new growth from a seed, the changing hue of leaves and the march of the seasons as the sun drops below the horizon each day, and as it rises again into the sky at the end of a long night. The only way that you can truly die is to cling to life. I am not dead. We are not dead. I am here. I am with you. I am in all the solitary places you go to get away from it all. Listen to me call. I am with you. Let us feel in the air and feel our donkey's ears with pride. Let us feel our goat's hooves on the ground. Let us celebrate. For a wild God is calling. Howling in your soul. Crawling through the chambers of your heart. He is the destroyer of worlds. The end of civilization. He dwells beyond fear, your fear. He lives beyond language, your language. He is the primordial roar, the longing in your blood, the ancestral whisper, the observer, the healer, the guide, salvation. The wild God is reaching out his muddy fingers to you. Take hold. He knows that you can hear him. You know. So let him flow through your veins. Let him be wild. Let him be free. Thank you, everyone.